Yo, Mark, Leslie in the house. How you doing, brother?
Not too bad. How you doing? Thanks for having me here.
Thanks for joining me. How's your morning so far? Morning. It's still morning. Or is it
Yeah, well, it
afternoon?
just
Okay.
turned noon in the Eastern time zone, so
Yeah,
so
yeah,
far
yeah,
so good.
yeah.
It's starting to snow this part of the world. This is the time of year, so I may be shoveling
Yeah,
this
yeah.
up.
Quite a collection of books behind you. Wow.
Yeah, well, this right here is my brag shelf. So that first row is basically books I'm in, or my books,
Yeah,
or
yeah, yeah.
whatever, and then the rest of them are signed or autographed books that I've collected over the years from authors from all over the place. So I'm a big book nerd. What can I say?
I actually saw that on your website. It said book nerd at the end.
Yeah, that is the definition. Because again,
That's
I've been a
quite a
bookseller.
collection, man.
Yeah, I've been a writer since I was 15 years old and a bookseller since
Yeah.
about the age of what was I, 21, 22. So book nerd is just an easy way to capture it all.
Yeah, when I look at my collection next to me, yeah, I got a long way to go. I got a long way to go.
Hey.
I don't even want to ask about like your Kindle collection. How's that looking?
So I'm in Canada. I actually use Kobo, which is Canada's answer to Kindle. It was a
Right,
company
right,
that was
right, right.
born here in Toronto. But yeah, I have probably close to 1,000 ebooks on
Wow.
my Kobo, or on different apps on my phone, and audiobooks as well. So digital audio, digital ebooks as
Yeah,
well. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
I am, and I'm usually reading about 3 different books, if not 4 books at the same time. There's one that's on the bedstand, like a physical book is there. I've got stuff I'm reading on my Kobo. I've got audiobooks that I'm listening to, depending on like nonfiction and fiction, depending on what mood I'm in as I'm driving or walking the dog or whatever it is.
Yeah. I've got like got it set out very similar. And my reasoning behind it was because of which part of the day it actually is. So, like,
Mm,
if it's in the morning, so like I'm in my transactional state of mind. So
right.
now I want to read, material that is actually educating me and empowering me and growing me.
Okay. All right.
And
Like
midday now,
coffee
when
or
I'm in
tea in the
my
morning, right?
sorry.
Like coffee or tea in the morning that stimulates you and gets you ready for the day.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Because that's when, like, for me, my brain is like at its most active and I'm ready to learn. And,
Yeah.
like, say for midday onwards is more like my transactional time. So I'm good to just sit down with a novel if I find the time.
Ah,
Of course,
right.
if I do
Right. Yeah.
find the time. One question I want to ask you, like, how do you get around it, especially with a schedule such as yours that we are going to touch on, to find time to sit down and actually spend a good amount of time reading? Because I find that
Reading.
difficult for myself. Like,
Yeah.
you know,
Well, I try to take advantage of whatever opportunities I can for reading. And I know I learned from Stephen King that he never goes anywhere without a book, like a pocketbook
yeah,
shoved in his back pocket or whatever. And so, I mean, I always have, there's a book in the washroom. So for those longer trips, I'm going to take advantage of that and read a few
yeah,
pages
yeah,
while I definitely have audiobooks loaded to my phone. So when I am waiting in line at the grocery store or whatever, or if I'm going to meet someone somewhere and I know I'm going to be sitting for a while, I'll either have my Kobo reader with me, or I can read on the device on my phone, or I'll have a physical book with me. And I try, and again, I may not. There are times when I get into a book, like it's usually at the end of the day when I don't have something pressing. Okay, I'm relaxing for the day. I'm going to sit in a nice chair, a nice hot cup of cocoa or something like that, or a nice
yeah,
scotch, sip at it while I'm just reading and enjoying. In front, I have an electric fireplace here in my office, so I can sit in my book chair and just read. But I often don't have those uninterrupted long stretches of time, so I really do try to fit in my reading wherever I can, because I mean, as an author, I have more ideas than I'll ever be able to write. But as a reader, I have more books I want to read than I'll ever be able to read. So I'm trying my best. And I'm a guy at the world's biggest buffet of all of the foods from all over that I really want to try. And I want to try as many as I can before they kick me out,
yeah,
before they close the doors, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. There's always like I'm just trying to get around that, like just to like I'm working on it. Like one of
Yeah.
my weaknesses, at the moment, just finding that allocated time throughout the day just to get through the material I want to get through. But
Yeah.
progress, thought let me get your personal opinion on that. Like, what's your
Yeah.
strategy in it all?
I think for anyone listening who's looking for ways to read more, not a
Yeah.
lot of people, when they first think about listening to an audiobook, they're a lot better now than they used to be. The quality of audiobooks is gone up. And if you give it a try, just like if you've never given ebooks a try, you kind of go on a digital diet where you just read ebooks for a week, and then you realize there's no difference. You're just reading it no matter it's on a screen or a page, and it's more convenient. The same thing with audiobooks. What I love about them is I can read while I'm shoveling the snow. I can read while I'm raking the lawn. I can read while I'm going on a run or even driving, because I have these bone conductor headsets that allow me to be able to still hear ambient noise, but I can still hear my audiobook. And so when I was going in driving an hour yesterday to go have dinner with my kid, and that hour I could listen. Now here's the other thing. I can speed up the audio to about 1.4. So it's just a little bit faster. And so I can listen to an 8-hour audiobook in about maybe 6 hours. I can't do the math in my head, but you know what I mean? Like less time than the full 8 hours. And so I can squeeze more in in that way.
Yeah. No, definitely it does help. I remember it was just before COVID hit in 2020. I was invited to a community summit, and one of the speakers said that people should read more. Okay, personally for myself, I rather have a book in my hand and read.
Yeah.
But she was like, which I agreed with her, in order for an individual to improve their vocabulary, they will need to read more. So with regards to an audio book, that doesn't really, or does it, can improve your vocabulary.
Yeah.
What is your thought on that?
I
Because from
mean,
her point of view, like reading a book, it's going to
yeah.
improve your
Well,
vocabulary, your writing.
different people learn differently, right? There are different learners. There are learners in classrooms that learn from reading it on the board, from writing it down, from hearing it, from seeing, whatever the case may be. And I have always been somebody who learns, and this is a thing I've watched different movies or listened to songs and things like that. Song lyrics stick in my head because I've heard the song hundreds of times, and I know every single lyric from thousands of songs. I also know dialogue from TV shows and movies that I've watched repeatedly because that auditory memory is really solid. Now, when you read a book, your eyes translate those little characters on the page into a story in your head, right? Like a narrative or instructions or information if it's nonfiction and you're learning something. When I'm listening to a book, it's coming into the same head and the same imagination with an auditory fashion. If I was reading with Braille, it would be touch, right? That's how those words would get into my imagination. So no matter how it comes in, it's a story or it's information that plays in your head. There's a narrative that goes in your head. Now, here's the interesting thing, and I was talking to someone about this earlier this week. There are times when I can't remember how I read a book. Did I read it on an ebook reader like a Kobo or a Kindle? Did I listen to it, or did I read it on paper, like a physical copy of the book? And there are times I can't remember how I read it. All I remember is what the author wanted to convey to me. Story, characters, emotion, message, learning, whatever it was. All I know is I now have that experience in me. I wrote a horror story about the idea of being able to absorb books in a different way too. So I've always been fascinated with that question.
Yeah. It's sort of like, you can't remember each and every single chapter that you read of every single book. But at times, like I find for myself, I'll be doing something or, some sort of idea comes to mind and you can't recall, where you actually got that idea from. But, you read it somewhere. That's what actually initiated it. So there's certain things I feel like for myself when I read, and because I'm trying my best to consume as much material as I can. As I read, my brain just stores certain things in my long-term memory. of what I'm reading that's going to benefit me somewhere, somehow down the line. But thanks for
Right.
sharing it. I mean, I've heard so
Pleasure.
many times from people, okay, so why don't you read? Not enough time, there's not enough time in the day. So
Yeah.
thanks for, sharing your opinion on that. So yeah, let's get started, man. Let's go back to day one. So you started writing since you were 15. Correct me if I'm wrong. 92 is when you released your first publication. So you've been in the game a long time, over
I have
25
been.
books. How did
Yeah.
all, start for you? How did it start?
I mean, I always loved story, right? I grew up reading comic books. So I read, Richie Rich comic books when I was a kid. And then Spider-Man was my big thing. I could not get enough. My mom worked at a local convenience store, like a corner store. And I guess every Tuesday is when the magazines and the comic books came in. And I just loved Spider-Man. So she would bring home, she'd buy at the end of the day and bring home a treat for me. And I just loved the stories. And what I loved about them is the serialization, right? Because sometimes it would be a standalone tale in one comic, but then you could read every month, it would be a continuing of this story. And when I was a kid and I was an only child, I would play with my little figurines, like little action figures and stuff like that. And I would tell myself stories, but I would even serialize them. So I'd be playing and telling a little story, and I get the story as if it was a TV show or a comic book that other people were experiencing. And then my mom would say, "Mark, it's dinner time." And then I would get to a place where I'd be like a good cliffhanger, and in my mind I would say, "To be continued." And then when I finished dinner and I could go play again, or I had to go do homework or whatever it was, and then when I finished that, I would come back and say, in previous episodes, here's what happened. And so I was doing that anyways. And then when I got a little bit older, I started doing these little cartoons, stick figure cartoons. And I was like, oh my God, I could take a story, because I didn't realize people had to write them and tell these stories. I could take a story and put it on a piece of paper, and I could walk away, and someone else could look at that piece of paper, and that story could suddenly be in their head. And I went, oh my God, that's magic. I have discovered magic. And then I found my mom's Underwood typewriter in the back of her closet. So I'm not sure, you're pretty young. So a typewriter kind of looks like a computer keyboard.
Yeah,
but like these little keys, and it would press this ink up against.
Yeah.
That's how they would get words onto a page. And I fell in love with this typewriter. And I was just like, oh my God, I can tell these stories. I can hammer them out. And it was like sheet at a time. And I started writing that way. And then I learned, writers can get paid for this. And I could send stories away to magazines. And like I said, I got my first rejection at the age of 15. And I think I was 21 or 22 when I finally got my first story published. After hundreds of rejections, I finally had a magazine out there that said, yes, we're going to give you, this is funny, $5 for this story, which was a big deal for me back in the day, and a copy of the magazine. And I still have the magazine here. I don't have the $5. That got spent right away, but I still have it here somewhere on one of my shelves. There it is.
The magazine is more valuable. Magazine is more valuable.
I still have that very first story that was published in 1992. And it was such an exciting thing that this was in a book that other people could read. Quite an amazing experience. And then, I was also working in the book industry by then, because I just graduated from university and I started working as a bookseller. Where else is a book nerd going to work, right? Who has an English degree, So, that's kind of where it started for me. And then it was just send stories out to magazines. And then as I got more experience and I sent them to bigger markets and bigger magazines, the pay started to go from $5 to $10 to $25 to $50 to, I think back in the day, 5 cents US a word was considered professional rights. And it wasn't until 2001 that I sold and got my very first pro rate story. I think I made 8 cents US per word. And I was like, woohoo!
Yeah. Just on the topic, once again, for the listeners who are scared of rejection, you are another example now on the podcast that it took you, from 15 years old to 21 to get your first publication. You never give up. You never stopped. You kept writing.
That's right.
You kept striving until you got it. Do not give up on the first rejection, not even the 10th rejection.
Well, and
Keep
here's the
going
thing.
as long as you're passionate about it.
It's important. I mean, especially if it's something that gives you pleasure. The act of writing itself gives you pleasure. You keep at it. Now, one of the things I learned, and I learned this from I think it was an article in Writer's Digest magazine, because that was a monthly magazine that I used to get all the time. And I would read every article about how to be a better writer and learn my skills. But one of the things I learned from somebody was that on average, it takes 13 rejections for every acceptance. And so I would not, I mean, yes, I had some stories that were rejected 30 times before they got published, but I would make sure it's like, well, I haven't gotten 13 rejections yet. So I still got to keep going until I finally get, some stories I'd send and would sell instantly, or maybe after 1 or 2 rejections. Others, it would take 30. But on average, it was 13. So I kept that number, lucky 13. I kept that in mind. And I was like, wow, this story's been rejected 5 times. I'm like, yeah, but it hasn't hit the average yet. So I've got to increase my odds. And so it was kind of funny. The more I submitted, the luckier I got with my acceptances, ironically, right? Even though I racked up a heck of a lot of rejections.
Yeah, you were consistent, man. You were consistent.
Yeah, because I believed that the stories I were writing were important, that other people might want to experience and enjoy, and I wasn't ready to give up on myself that easily.
Yeah. Quite a story, man. Quite a story. I'm glad, you never give up. It's so inspiring, for me as well, to just hear stories like that, because then okay, no, something's not working out. You just keep pushing. We've all been down that road,
The difference is getting up one more time, right? That's the difference. I got up one more time.
Yeah, I mean, you know what? Like, I'm in the music industry, and there's so many artists that step in, and we go through the whole consulting process. But the moment they see their first track, it doesn't like kick off as well as they would have expected it to. Boom, that's it. Game over. They've given up. But I mean, it's the first track. It's the first blog. It's the first book. Like, you don't just stop at the first one. I mean, I had a conversation with someone else 3 weeks ago on the podcast about Google. Google got rejected 130 times. If you read the story about Google, they got rejected 130 times. Imagine if they gave up at 130.
Yeah. And they've done all right for themselves. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, you keep going. Rejection is part of the game.
It really is, and it's hard. It is really hard as a creative, as an artist, as a musician, as a writer. It's really hard when you put something out there and it is not accepted the way that you would hope it has been accepted, because everyone has different tastes and different feels and things like that. But one of the things I love to tell authors is the first person you have to satisfy is yourself, right? Like, is this a story that you feel? Is this something that's really that you need to express? Great. Yeah. The act of creating it itself is powerful and meaningful and intrinsically rewarding to you. There are probably other people who feel the same way you do, because let's say, what are books? What is storytelling? What is art? What is music? What is creativity? It is the connecting of people. An artist creates something and somebody else experiences it. And part of that, at underlying fundamental level, part of that is the artist saying, you see something here that you value, you see something, you got something out of this, you're not alone. Now, it's connecting human beings, right? Whether one other person feels that way or millions of other people feel that way, you bridge that connection between humans in so many ways. Like, we can experience the music together, we can look at the art together, we can talk about a story or experience a movie together, or even read. I know during the pandemic, my wife and I read to one another. We were stuck in the house, and what we had like 2 copies of the same book, a classic literature book that I had read when I was younger, and I would read to her while her eyeballs were going along the page, and then the one chapter, and then she would read the next chapter back to me. And it's kind of one of the things we did every day just to pass the time. And it was like, now we listen to audiobooks together while we do jigsaw puzzles, right? So
she's also involved in the industry.
She's not. She's in education. But what we do in the winter months, because we don't do a lot outdoor, not as much as hiking and swimming and going camping and stuff like that in the summer when it's nice outside, because we're not into winter sports that much, is we'll do jigsaw puzzles, which is fun. It's creative and collaborative. But then we'll put an audiobook on, and we listen to the audiobook while we're doing the jigsaw puzzle. So we're both experiencing that book together, like sitting and watching a TV show or a movie together. But it's a little bit more creative because we're a little bit more engaged and animated. And
you're growing and you're learning in the same way.
Yeah, and we'll often pick a book of nonfiction of something we want to learn more about.
Yeah. Or I guess with the nonfictions, yeah,
exactly. And that's really great.
Yeah. While we're on the topic of fiction, nonfiction, I've noticed with you within your bio, you've got speculative fiction.
Yeah.
So that's a new word to me now. So what is the difference between fiction and speculative fiction?
So speculative fiction is really, I like it because it's all encompassing of the genres I like to write. Now, I grew up really enjoying what if stories. And what if stories, I mean, the stories are all what if in some, what if this happened to someone or whatever. But the what ifs I liked had to do with stuff that was either science fiction or fantasy or horror, because it usually involved things that weren't necessarily of the world that we know and understand through science, at least the science we understand today. And so speculative fiction is fiction of the surreal, of science fiction and fantasy, of horror, of paranormal, of the extraordinary in some ways. And so I use speculative fiction to cover all of those genres that are not necessarily grounded in 100% in the reality that we know, if you know what I mean.
Right. Okay, no, thanks for the clarity on that.
Yeah.
Because when I read speculative fiction, I'm like, okay, what does this
mean? Did you speculate? What if?
Yeah.
Like, what if we could inhabit Mars, right? What if we could fly to another planet and inhabit another planet? What if dragons were real and knights and shining armor, like all that stuff that happened? What if a monster lives in the sewer and eats little children? Like, that's all speculative fiction.
Yeah. For me right now, all these what ifs just seem so much more real as the world unfolds. The author I spoke to, like you even mentioned dragons yourself, author I spoke to on Sunday, like I told him, like, as much as, the narrative may be that dragons didn't exist, maybe that's what's getting pushed on most, and it was just a creature that was made up. I don't really believe it,
Yeah.
Somewhere deep down, for me, it's like dragons did exist sometime.
Well, they do.
At some time.
I mean, in the world we live in today, and the reality we experience on a day-to-day basis, actually, there are stranger things that are happening in the world than dragons. Like, there's a lot of stuff that if I wrote certain things that are happening in the world, I mean, I can think about the Western world right now. I was like, nobody would believe this. This is too outrageous. Who would believe this?
Yeah.
So dragons are relatively sane.
Yeah, they lived in a more sane time. You know? That's true. No, that made me laugh. That made me laugh when you look at what's going on around the world. So I know you didn't want to touch on National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. Okay, I think I did, if I remember correctly, watch the first one, the movie itself.
You've only seen Vacation?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry? Yeah.
You've only seen the first Vacation. Okay.
Yeah, if I remember correctly. If we are talking about the movie itself,
Yeah.
The movie itself. So, I mean, just like really quickly, so how does that fit in to your life?
So, I'm 55, so I've been around for a long time, and I was very influenced by a lot of movies in the 80s, like that I watched repeatedly when I was a young teenager and becoming a young adult and a young adult in general. And there were a lot of movies in the 80s that were impactful to me. So Planes, Trains, and Automobiles by John Hughes, Christmas Vacation, which was also written by John Hughes, and Die Hard and stuff like that. So I've always watched these are movies I watch every year. And I've watched probably 100 times in the last 30, 35 years. There was something about, and I started writing movie trivia books 3 years ago when I saw the book, it's called The Canadian Mounted, and I saw it on Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. It's a book that John Candy's character, Del Griffith, is reading at the airport in New York when he meets Steve Martin's character, Neil Page. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Ha ha ha. John Candy's a Canadian, and it's a book of adult novel called The Canadian Mounted. Ha ha ha. It's that funny reference because he's Canadian. And then in Deadpool, years later, 20 years later, in Deadpool, Wade Wilson, the character of Deadpool, has that book. And I'm thinking, oh, that's so cool. Was this only ever a prop? And I did some research and went, no, it actually was a real book at one point. But it's no longer available. So I made the book available with trivia. And I said, I've watched this movie hundreds of times. I'm going to put together as much as I can learn from the shows, from the director's cuts and the commentary and the articles that were written and people that were interviewed about it. I'm gonna dig into details as much as I can and write that. And I figured that's a book I would like to read. Maybe 20 other people in the world might like it. Now, fortunately, thousands of people liked it. So then I did a book on Die Hard. I figured, well, I watch Die Hard every year. And, they argue, is it a Christmas movie? Is it not a Christmas movie? And so I wrote a book about Die Hard. And then this year, on the 35th anniversary of Christmas Vacation, I thought the same thing. Let's write it was based on a John Hughes short story. John Hughes adapted the screenplay. The actor who plays Rusty was also in the only other Christmas movie published that was released in 1989, which was the movie first came out, Prancer. And then he went on to, star in Big Bang Theory, and like all of these little trivial bits. And I realized I had over 300 bits of trivia about the movie. Why not put it in a book that people could just appreciate and enjoy?
Yeah. Okay, no, thanks for sharing, that part. Like, I know, yesterday when you sent an email and you said, let's not mention, I was like, okay, let me just put it in because...
Well, I didn't know, right? And I also did, because there are, is here in Canada, and I know in the US, it's a movie that a lot of people will watch every year. But is that a movie that people watch in other countries in the world? So I wasn't sure if that would resonate with your audience as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. That does make sense. But, I also want to get, the audience familiar with who the guest is also. Like, how did that actually fit into
and why would somebody write horror and urban fantasy? Why would somebody just suddenly pivot and write books of trivia? I was like, here's the thing. If I'm going to spend hundreds of hours watching a movie, I may as well put that to good use. Right.
Yeah, 100%. Now, I just want to get the audience, 100% familiar with whoever the guest is, within, give or take, ball figure 1 hour that we do have. So, thanks for sharing that. So, on to your latest release, One Hand Screaming Horror. Thanks again for sending a free copy. I actually didn't know you could do that with Kindle.
Yeah, you were able to click the link and then load it to your Kindle.
Download that, upload. Yeah, I didn't know you could do that. But I guess, okay, I do have a few books on Kindle. Okay.
Yeah.
But as I said, I love physical books more. So I'm still working around, how to get, to all the books that I have in so many various places all at once.
Yeah.
So I wasn't too familiar that you could actually do that with Kindle, just send a file.
Yeah, there is
upload, transfer to your account.
Well, any authors who are listening, it's a company called BookFunnel. So bookfunnel.com. And you can go and as an author create an account. And what I did, just so listeners understand, is I have an account with BookFunnel where when I want to provide like a radio or a podcast host or whatever, or a reviewer, a copy of my book for free, or if people sign up for my newsletter, they can get a book for free. BookFunnel, instead of me saying, here's an EPUB, go and figure out how you're going to put it on your Kindle or your Nook or your Kobo or whatever, or read it on Apple, however, BookFunnel provides a link that says, hey, here's your free book, right? And then it says, how do you want to read this? So I want to read it online. I want to read it on my Kindle. I want to read it on my Kobo. You click that, and it tells you what steps to follow to get it on your Kindle. And you can use it to sell books directly, too. So if people buy books directly from my online web store, like the Mark Leslie web store, I get paid for it. And then BookFunnel automatically takes care of sending it to you. So I don't have to know the tech. Right? Like, here's what you have to do. So it makes it so easy. And so when I knew we'd be chatting, it's like, well, here you go. Here's the book. You can download it. It's yours. Just grab a copy.
Yeah. No, I'm looking forward to that one. I love watching horror movies. When it comes to reading, it's mainly thrillers. James Patterson, huge fan. Love his stories. So, yeah. No, I'm looking forward to checking your one out. So how did that one come about, and why horror specifically?
Yeah, so I had, as you know, I'd been writing for a long time. And the going wisdom for writers back in the day was, okay, if you want to be a novelist, you want to be an author, and you want to have books out, you need to send your stories to magazines. And then as you get stories accepted in magazines, you're building a resume. You're building your career, and you start off, like I said, that first one was $5 on a copy. And then as I could send to bigger magazines that could pay more, I worked my way up, right? From earning really crappy money and then starting to earn professional wages. But that first story was published in 92, and I started working in bookstores as a bookseller. And people would, and I'd had dozens of stories published, but people would come into the bookstore, and then they would find out I was a writer, and they would say, you're a writer, right? It's like, yeah, I'm a writer. It's like, what do you write? It's like, well, I write speculative fiction. I write science fiction, fantasy, and horror, and I write, weird tales and stuff like that. It's like, and they would look around the bookstore and go, well, where can I find your books? And I would get a look of shock on my face, and I'd go, well, if you get in your car and you drive about 3 hours south, I'm in Ontario, Canada, and you go to the border and you cross over into upstate New York, there's a convenience store at a gas station on the corner of this small town. This small press magazine is only distributed locally to 3,000 people. But, you have to get there before the end of the month because my stuff was only available in magazines here and there, and it was never in a bookstore. And I went, what am I going to do? I want to have a book. So I took a bunch of my previously published horror stories and a few stories I had not sold to any market. And I said, and this was back in 2004, so self-publishing was not an easy thing. I created an account with a company, Ingram, but they didn't have Ingram Spark, so there wasn't an easy way to do this. And I said, I'm going to make a print-on-demand version available. I'm going to format it myself. I'm going to learn how to do this. I had my best friend was a graphic artist, so he did the cover for me. And I think I gave him a case of beer, which was $24 at the time. That's what it cost me to get this cover done. When I made it available through Ingram, and Ingram is the world's largest English language book wholesaler. They will print the book on demand and then ship it to customers. And I made this available, and I was able to go into bookstores, and I was able to do events and stuff like that. So that was 20 years ago. And I've since published more than 35 books. But as the 20th anniversary came up, I thought, and self-publishing didn't really take off till 2009, 2010, when it was easy and you could make ebooks and stuff, because ebooks didn't really kind of launch until the Kindle launched, right? 2008, 9, 7, 8, 9, that was when it started to really get popular. And I thought, I was a pioneer. Like I was self-publishing before all the cool kids started doing it. And I thought, I need to celebrate the 20th anniversary of my first book by creating a new version of the book that also included stories that I've published in the last 20 years, as well as updated behind-the-scene notes. So I did One Hand Screaming and 20 Haunting Years. And so the original book, just to show you, is the original book right here. There's my eye with a very subtle skull. You can see in the corner, One Hand Screaming, and it's very thin. It was like, 150 pages. This is close to 400 pages. So, and again, it's my eye 20 years later with a skull and a lot more blood. And so I did that book. And I also made it available. I used Kickstarter to launch it because there were special editions created, like full color, because I also had original art. Original art, for example, I have some stories about Halloween. So there's like the scarecrow and stuff like that, and snowman stories. So I have, echoes in that. Like I had original art done for it, but then the special edition was a 2-page full color spread. And I made that available, but I also did, because I couldn't stop there, I also worked with a local brewery, and I had a beer made called One Hop Screaming. And this collaborative beer was available with the book through a local brewery. And again, when you bought the beer, and so I've got the can is here, so you can see the One Hop Screaming, the skull on it. And you bought the beer, there's a barcode where you could scan and read a story about a haunted beer. And so, because I love craft beer. I love trying different beers when I travel. And I love just, drinking craft beers and unique brews. And I thought, I'm a book nerd and a beer nerd. I got to do this. And so that was quite an interesting process. It was a lot of work, but it was so fun. I said I couldn't let the 20th anniversary of that first book, I couldn't let that go by without making a big deal of it. Yeah.
Any examples you want to share, from the book, like some storylines?
Yeah. So you might like this. So this story opens the new edition of the book, and it's a story that relates very specifically to what we talked about, reading, how people read, and it is called The Exquisite Taste of a Book-Aged Skull. And it does relate to beer, because one of the things that happens when you go and try beer, there are styles of beers, porters and stouts, that are known as barrel aged, where they age the beer in a bourbon barrel or a wine barrel or in some sort of barrel that had another liquor in it, like some sort of whiskey. And then the beer absorbs some of the essence from the wood of that. So you can have it's called like a bourbon barrel aged stout. So you have the stout, which is the beer, but it also has the bourbon flavor that comes into the stout. And so I was taking because I still take workshops to learn how to write, because you're always learning and growing. And Dean Wesley Smith, who's a good friend of mine, but also was teaching this course on horror writing. I said, I've never taken a horror writing course from Dean, and we've been friends for a long time. So when I was taking the course, he said, I'm surprised you've never written, because I collect skeletons and skulls and stuff like that. That's part of my brand as an author, right? So I have my skeleton shirt on, and you can see one behind me. There's a skeleton in my car who comes with me to book events. And he said, I'm surprised you've never written a book about skeletons or skulls. A story. And I was like, okay, I'll challenge accepted. So I wrote this story, and this is how this all ties into what I've just shared. It's about a guy who learns a secret from his great uncle Nathan. And his great uncle, because he's so upset, like me, he looks around and he says, I'm never going to read all the books I want to read. Reading is such a magical experience. I want to read more. And great uncle Nathan teaches him something that he could do. He said, if you find the skull of somebody who's read a lot of books, and you age their skull, because what happens is the skull has juices in it, and they actually dry. Like when you first die, your skull is heavier than 20 years later, because as the liquids inside the skull dry, I'm not saying inside your head, but the skull itself, the bone, actually has liquid in it, like mild liquid. It ages out and it greases out, and there's less liquid. But if you can get the skull of somebody who's recently died, who's read a lot of books, and you put this special mixture of this bourbon into the skull, it absorbs all the stories that person's read in their life, like a bourbon barrel. And when you drink it, you absorb the stories and the experiences of all the books they've ever read. So it's a way for this main character, who now owns a used bookstore, and he finds people like who either want to donate their body to science, but they donate they're going to donate, or he may actually be so obsessed and so addicted to reading that he actually finds book lovers and kills them so he can absorb the stories by drinking from their skulls. And I thought, that is twisted and sick and disturbing, but also somehow appealing. If you think about it. So that's the story that opens the collection. And it's kind of like, I always describe them as, my stories are kind of like Twilight Zone or Black Mirror, if you're familiar with those TV shows. Like, they're just weird sort of tales.
Weird is good. Weird is good. I had someone ask me today also, like, I designed a new flyer for this new podcast that I'm going to be co-hosting on. And she asked me, she said, no, the flyer looks really awesome, but you can see, like, on the American flag, like, you know, the blue is like on the left in the traditional flag, but now it's like more in the center. And I told her, yeah, that's just what I do. I need to make it look a bit weird, you know. Normally it's boring. You know, I have to spice it up a bit.
Yeah, it's got to be something where they go, wait a second, it seems familiar, but it's just off a little bit. Yeah,
just off. Okay, but thanks for sharing that, man. That sounds like a quite interesting. I actually see it like, you know, once again, it's what ifs, you know, what if that is like biologically possible, you know?
What if you could?
Like, I mean, so many things are possible in 2024.
Yeah.
You feel me? You know, you could easily do that, you know, just transfer. Cool. No problem. Done deal.
I have another story in the collection that is a what if, and I think it is in this collection. It's hard to remember because I had to cut it down. Right, it's not every story, but it's a story about is Active Reader in this collection? I can't even remember. Oh no, maybe. Oh no, Browsers is the story that ends the collection, and it's about a bookstore. Because again, I love books. It's about a bookstore that is like a Venus flytrap to book nerds. So Venus flytrap, you're attracted, you go in, and it keeps you and eats you. Imagine a bookstore that consumes book nerds that go in. They can go in, but they can never leave. And I thought, that's kind of cool. And it happened to me, sort of. I was in a bookstore. The very first time visiting Hamilton, Ontario, and what I often do when I'm in a new city is back in the day there was no internet, so I'd go to the Yellow Pages and I would look up bookstores and I would go and take a physical map because there was no Google Maps or map, right? And then I would write down the addresses and I would go drive and visit the various bookstores. And this one bookstore in Hamilton, Ontario, I went into. And as I was going in, it was like, it's just weird. And there was all these rooms connected to one another. And I started just wandering through. And even one of them, there was somebody putting up shelves in a room, like it was being built while I was there. And I got lost and I couldn't find my way out. And I panicked and I'm running around from room to room. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm trapped in this. And then that's when I went, bam, what if that happened? What if there was a bookstore that doesn't let you out? So again, something that book people can get really excited about, but go, oh my God, what if all... And then you think, okay, I'm trapped in a bookstore. Great, I can read for the rest of my life. Yeah, but where are you going to go to the bathroom? How are you going to eat? Right? Stuff like that.
Yeah. I would love to ask the question, you know, on the podcast, how does that end? But I'm not. I want to find out myself. And listeners, you need to find out yourself also by purchasing the book. What happens? You're going into the bookstore, you trap the ending, that's on you. You know,
like that's what if. What did I? Yeah. Here's the thing: what did I do with that story? Because if somebody else had that idea, they might do something different than what I did.
Yeah. Okay, so I mean, we've touched on your successful artistic author career. Before I get onto this, I just want to ask the question: like, are you a fan of Iron Man?
Oh yeah, I like Iron Man.
Is that what inspired Stark Publishing?
So yeah, Stark Publishing was actually, ironically, I mean, yes, I was aware of Tony Stark. I liked his character in the comic book because he was an alcoholic, and again, like Peter Parker was a nerd and shy and stuff, and he put on the mask, and that gave him confidence to wisecrack and stuff like that. Iron Man struggled with alcoholism in the comics, and so there was like this two sides of a character. So I always liked that. But Stark Publishing, my company, came from, I told you, my buddy Steve, who did the cover design for me. He also designed the logo, because when we were in college together, when we were kids, he wanted to be an animator and I wanted to be a writer. And we dreamed that one day we would have a company called Stark Entertainment, and he would I would write stories and he would animate them, and we would be like, Walt Disney or something, making cartoons and, whatever Pixar or whatever that became. In college, we had a DJ company. We used to go and DJ dances and weddings and stuff like that, where we would play music on cassettes. Like, this is old school. And he called it Stark Entertainment. And the Stark came from Steve and Mark. He got the first 2 letters. I got the last 3.
Right.
And so when I went to publish my first book, I said, I need to pretend it's a real publisher. I need to have a logo and everything. So Steve designed me the Stark logo, which I use to this day. It's got like a quill. Looks like it has a quill on it. I'm trying to see the logo is somewhat visible right there.
Okay. Yeah.
So Stark. And so, he designed the logo and designed my first book cover for me. And I've been using Stark Publishing for my own books and my own company since 2004.
Yeah. So how long has Stark Publishing been on the map?
Well, 20 years now. I first registered. Again, back in the day. I didn't want anyone to know that book was self-published. I wanted it to look like anyone's book, so I couldn't say Mark. And my real last name is Lefebvre, not Leslie. Leslie's my middle name, but nobody can pronounce my last name or spell it. So I went with my first name, my middle name. And similarly, I used Stark Publishing because I wanted to look like a real author. And so,
yeah. So with Stark Publishing, okay, so it's fully independent. Is it just for all of your publications, or do you have authors that you are actually signing on or have signed on already?
So it is 90% is my books. Some of the books are books I've co-authored with other people. And I have published a few books. So one of my mentors, Sean Costello, who's a horror writer from here in Ontario, Canada, I published all of Sean's books because he's mentored me and taught me over the years. And I'm like, so I do the publishing logistics for him, and we kind of split that. And then I have a few other books. There's a friend of mine who's a retired homicide detective who's written some books about his experience in homicide for 30 years. And so I've published Dave Sweet's books as well. And then another friend of mine who's got these romantic thrillers, Sarah Cades, I've published her books as well. So I usually... I have Wolf Moon, who's got a book for writers. I've got a friend of mine who's in the UK who's homeless, and it's his experiences of being homeless in London. And so I've published books from other people that I'm really good friends with. But the reality is, I'm not a publisher that has physical distribution into bookstores like a real publisher. I am no more of a publisher than anyone could be just by using the free tools that they can use for publishing to Kindle or using a distributor like Draft to Digital, for example, to get your ebooks and print books distributed to various platforms. So what I'm very clear with my authors is I don't offer all the things that a traditional publisher offers that you can't do for yourself. It's like, sign with a publisher. The publisher usually pays you in advance. Well, I don't pay advances because I don't have the budget for it. We just split the royalties when they come in. And so that's like a different way of doing it.
Yeah, this is, goes back again, second time I'm mentioning on the show now, to the author I interviewed also on Sunday. He said the same thing. He has his own publishing company, but he can't do what a traditional publishing company would do, such as give an advance. And then,
bookstores. That's expensive. It's expensive to put a book in a warehouse. I've done it with a couple books, and it costs thousands of dollars up front that you may never get back. So,
So, I mean, would you advise like authors out there, as I would advise, musicians out there to, be independent, launch your own independent publishing company and publish your own books under that company instead of chasing, a big, huge publishing house?
I would say be open to both. And here's why. When you go to do it yourself, you have to assume all the responsibility that a publisher takes on. So the responsibility is putting out the best book you can, which means having the book edited, having a good cover design. Like I know when I sent you the cover design that
I was blown away.
the Juan button and Juan Cadron. I mean, again, he charges $149 US for a front cover, and then he charges more for the full cover wrap. But that's a really affordable, and he's brilliant. He's done
good.
The majority. The majority of my books he's done. So you have to have put that in so you can give your book the best chance it can on the market. And that's a lot of work for authors. Now, I just signed a contract last week. I've been published with 4 different traditional publishers, and I have signed contracts, and I will continue to sign contracts with publishers because, yes, if I sell an ebook for $5 US, I get $3.50, direct deposit 3 months later, right? Almost immediately, right? Stuff I sell myself directly, it's in my bank account the next day. When I'm with a publisher, they pay for the editing, they pay for the cover design, they give me a small advance, and then I get royalties usually every 6 months or once a year. The benefit of the publisher is the publisher can get my book into bookstores. So some of my books, I can walk into bookstores throughout North America and I can find my books on the shelf because they're available through traditional publisher. My self-published books are not necessarily going to be on the shelf unless I do a lot of extra work to get them there. So what I advise to writers is, if you want a traditional deal, it's not going to be as glamorous as you think it is, because James Patterson gets a lot of money for his books and Stephen King gets a lot of money for his books, but you and I probably not going to get as much money from those publishers or have as much promo. And it's hard, right? The rejection is huge. If you want to get the book out, like 20 years ago, I just wanted a book available. So these stories were already edited, which was nice because they were already been published in a magazine somewhere. And I already gotten paid for them. So I put them all together and said, well, it's already edited and stuff. Let's just put it together and put that book out there. So I get the best of both worlds. I have the benefit of controlling my own things if I want to. If I want to change the cover, I can. If I want to remove a story or add a story, I can.
Yeah.
With my traditionally published books, they're locked in. I mean, I remember finding a mistake in one of my traditionally published books that all of us missed. And I reached out to the publisher and said, hey, can I just change this one thing? Because I learned afterwards that that's not correct. No, it's locked in. It's locked in. They're not going to spend the money to change it and update it and whatever. So there are pros and cons, right, for traditional publishing and finding. Now, the other thing I will tell you, because I think this is so important, anyone who calls themselves a publisher and asks you for money so they can publish your book is not a real publisher. They will help you publish the book, but you're going to spend a lot of money to do that. And if I'm going to spend all that money, I want to hire the editor myself. I want to hire the cover designer myself. I don't want to just be randomly giving it to someone who's going to pretend to be a publisher and pretend to actually be engaged in wanting to sell my book. Most of those people are interested in taking money from you as an author, not in selling your books, because they make all their money up front. Take their money and you're gone. So be very careful. And I always tell writers to just Google writer beware. And Victoria Strauss runs this website, and there's a lot of nefarious players who are out to, I guess, to trick authors into taking their money.
Right. Yeah, I mean, this is just the world we live in, you have to be very cautious. You have to be very cautious living in this digital area that is growing exponentially. You have to be, careful. You just have to be paying attention all the time.
Exactly.
There are times, just think it through. Think it through first before you decide, okay, cool, I'm looking for that big break. And here's this guy, he's offering me this, but he's saying, okay, I need to give him $1,000 first. Like, that must be a red flag already.
And if it seems too good to be true, right? If it seems too good to be true, it's like, oh yeah, I'm going to make you a millionaire. Just have to give me $1,000 and I'll publish your book and we'll make millions. It's like, we're going to make millions. Why don't you give me $1 million up front? And then you can just keep all the profit from the book when it's published. No, thanks for sharing that. I mean, you have to be extremely cautious. Extremely cautious. So, I mean, besides, being a full-time author, because I'm sure you are still writing material, that will never stop. Running your own publishing company, I've also seen that you also carry many other hats in many other organizations. Yes.
How do you fit all of that into your life?
That is a great question, and I'm glad you asked it, because I'm very lucky. I left full-time employment back in 2017 because I was starting to make enough money as a writer. Now, keep in mind how long I had been publishing and writing for that to happen. Finally was making enough money that I didn't need a full-time job. I consult for authors and for publishers and people in the industry who are looking, because I have, 30 plus years of experience in book selling as a writer in publishing. So I understand a lot about the business of writing and publishing. I do consult for Draft to Digital, which is a distribution company that allows authors to be able to publish their ebooks and their print books for free. So it's a great tool. And it's a tool I've used as an author since they launched, 2012, 2013. So I've used them for a long time. I also I work with the group Wide for the Win. We formed a company, Wide for the Win, started as a Facebook group for authors who wanted to learn how to sell books, not just on Amazon, but everywhere, like Kobo and Google and Apple and all the other places. And so, I do speaking at a lot of different conferences and stuff. So I think it seems like I'm working a lot, but I'm working less than when I was managing a bookstore. And I'm working a lot less than when I actually worked at Kobo and I helped create their self-publishing platform, because I used to work about 80 hours a week and then try to fit in my writing. So now I give 20 hours of my week to Draft to Digital. That's my commitment to them to get stuff done. All the rest of the time for the rest of my week is on my personal writing, consulting, working directly with authors and publishers and helping them out. And the podcast that I run, the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing. But because it's so much fun and it's something I truly love to do, I don't really take time off. I don't need to take time off because it's not, when I was working certain jobs, even though I really enjoyed the jobs, my God, the weekend's here. Yay, I'm not going to think about work. I never not think about writing and books. That's who I am. So I never take time off, but I also never work. If you know what I mean? Yeah. I play all day. I'm so lucky. And I get money for this. People pay me for this.
Yeah. It's not considered work, Then you finally reach a level where you know that day in, day out, you're doing what you love most.
I am. Yeah. I'm lucky. I'm very lucky. I get up at 5:30 in the morning. I feed the animals. I put on the coffee. I write for a little while. I wake up my wife around 7 o'clock to send her off to work, give her coffee. And then, I mean, if I'm not traveling, I go to a lot of conferences and stuff. I'm here just doing what I want. And if I needed to, like I could put my snow tires on, go to the garage and get the snow tires put on, or run an errand, I can just do that because it's very flexible. I can write when I usually write really early in the morning and get it over with the first thing, because then once the day starts and I start interacting with people, I get all sidetracked. So I can't get it done. So I have to
just ideas of the day.
Yeah. Well, again, like you said, in the morning, you've got that thing you want to learn. I need to do my creative output first thing and get it out of my system so I can then get on with the rest of my day.
Yeah. So, as we approach now, conclusion, you come from an era of typewriters,
yes.
ding, ding. And now we're in 2024. The game, of course, has changed a lot for creators all around the world.
Yeah.
What is your take on it, and what is the future of the industry itself? And I also want you to touch on AI at the moment. That's the cherry on top of the cake question for all creators that I'm interviewing on the podcast. A lot has changed. It may have been harder back then as far as typing it out, but you can correct me if I'm wrong on this. It was much more easier. The market wasn't so much more flooded. You could get much more recognized. You could get your work, wherever. You get where I'm going with this. If there was a publication company, okay, cool. If you submitting, they're going to take your work, and now it's more flooded.
Right.
Now there's so many different other blogging websites that are out there. It's harder than ever, to get your work out there. Even though you could be independent and eliminate all the red flags, it's going to cost you a lot. And there's no guarantee that, there's going to be an ROI on it.
Yes. Yeah. But here's the thing. There was never a guarantee that you were going to get an ROI. Back in the day, when you get a publishing contract, most books published never sell. That hasn't changed. There's just a lot more books published. Most of them never sell. That's the reality,
Yes,
whether
that's
you're with
it.
a big publisher or whether you do it yourself. Here's the thing, though. There's never been a better time to be a writer because you've never had more choice and more options. When I started, the only option was type my manuscript, put it in the mail, pay money to get it in the mail, send it to a publisher, and hope they put their blessing on it and say they want to publish it. I didn't have the choice of being able to self-publish and make money from self-publishing. So I think we do have more opportunity. But yeah, you are correct. Because there are no gatekeepers anymore and you can just release stuff into the world, there are opportunities for everyone, which means, but there are readers. There are a lot of readers. That means that a lot of the stuff that's getting published is never going to be seen and is never going to be purchased. There are also some tools. Now, here's the thing. Authors are freaked out and worried about AI. I'm concerned about AI, but I'm not as worried because here's the thing. It's happening whether we embrace it or not. And there are going to be people who use it in nefarious ways. Like there's always been people who do nefarious things with technology. They're going to learn pretty quickly. It's not an easy way to make a quick buck because there are no quick bucks to be made in publishing. The other thing, though, that exists is I've been leveraging AI as a writer for editing, right? So I use Pro Writing Aid, which is an AI-enabled tool that helps. And here's where it saves me money. I run my manuscript through that and I clean it up several times. I do several passes before I give it to my editor that I have to pay. And it takes my editor less time to clean up my manuscript with me. Like it's a very collaborative process, but it takes them less time because that tool helped me get rid of the low-hanging fruit and the junk that would waste a human person's time, but I do by habit because that's the way I use gestures and words and stuff. It kind of reduces some of that, so it saves me money and it saves my editor a headache. The other thing that I think is so important, there are some AI tools that I've used for generating marketing content of the stuff I've created, because it's really hard to write sales copy, but there are tools that I can load a manuscript to and it spits out marketing suggestions for marketing copy. Again, it's a first draft, but it gets me started. And then the other thing that I think is so important for writers to remember, there are ways for you to write the story that you can write, not that an AI can write, not that any other writer can write. I mentioned this earlier. I have the concept of a bookstore that doesn't let you leave. I bet you, if your listeners of this podcast are writers and they write a story based on that idea, it is going to be different from my story and different from your story and different from other people's story. And that's the magic of what you can bring to a story as a creative person, as an artist, as a musician, as a whatever it is you're doing. And that humanity, that unique voice that is your voice and your voice alone and your approach is a thing that can connect and resonate with readers. I think it would be so important. Like, for example, my trivia books about movies I love. Someone else who loves that movie as much as I love it is going to pick it up and go, oh, I can see in the way he's expressed. Like you can go online and find this trivia practically anywhere. But the way I shared that trivia with my own experience and passion is a unique experience where I'm connected to another person suddenly. And I think writers and artists and creatives need to embrace that humanity now more than ever before, because there will be an onslaught of digital slush. And how does a person connect with the story or with the character or whatever? It's usually through the voice of that unique voice of that author.
Yeah, and I feel like you also need to be innovative, with your marketing strategy. For listeners now, because you can't just write a book, or I can't just compose a song, produce a song, put it together. Put the book on Kindle, for example, put the track on Spotify, for example, and expect people to find out about it.
And just wait. Okay,
I put the book is there, but someone will find it. It doesn't work that way. The market is too flooded. You have to be extremely innovative, and you have to have components, and you have to be doing things that complement the book. Yourself, for example, is appearing on podcasts, having your own podcast to talk about your book. The beer, exactly. The beer. You have to be creative. You have to be creative. How am I going to get my book out to the world?
Right.
How am I going to get people familiar with me? And,
Yeah,
I
exactly.
mentioned this because there's a lot of people that just do the work, okay,
Yeah,
and put it out there, and that's it, they leave it. And they're expecting
yeah,
some miracle to happen and to sell
yeah.
out 1,000 copies in the first week, or to get, 10,000 streams off my track in the first week. But it's not going to happen if you don't put in the necessary market and be innovative. What
Yeah,
you've done with the can, I mean, come
yeah,
on, how many people would have thought of that?
yeah,
Who can I collaborate with? Who can I network with? Which
yeah.
workshops can I attend? You have to
Right.
be putting in that effort, even though it's going to cost you to travel. I'm going to use the States as an example, to travel to Canada. I'm not sure how you divide your
Yeah,
different regions.
yeah.
Okay.
We have provinces.
Even if
Yeah,
it's the
yeah,
provinces, okay, same as South Africa, okay,
yeah.
provinces. Even if it's going to cost me to travel to another province to attend a workshop that is going to be packed with thousands of authors and publishers and editors, I need to put in that effort in order to market myself as a brand. You
Right.
know,
Yeah,
you have to do it. That's what you
yeah,
have to do now in 2024, moving onwards. I mean,
yeah,
if I look at, you can also touch on this. If I look at the traditional record labels in the music industry, right?
yeah,
Even though, same as the publishing companies, they are going to handle all, bulk of the work, for you. That's even changing now. They still want you as the creator to be putting in
yes,
the work. They still
yeah,
want it from you. So even though we're going to assist you with, okay, the studio time or the editing time, and we're going to design your cover for the book and
yeah.
so on, we're going to do all of that. No, but we still need you to actually put in the work for the
Right. And
market.
we need you to do the thing. We need you to go and play in the at the bus station or the subway. We need you to go to the local beer hall and play your music live for other people. Maybe collaborate with an artist and get that music out with some visual so it can be shared in different ways on social media. And maybe people use it in a meme somewhere, and so suddenly the song can get heard
Yeah,
repeatedly.
yeah,
It's the same sort of thing. Looking at creative collaborations on how, because here's the thing, if you've written a book, you already know how to tell a story. And all marketing is storytelling in a different way. Right. So it's not
yeah,
a
yeah,
scary, salesy thing. It's telling a good story.
yeah. I mean, I've even seen like some cool AI tools, to take your story you've written and you can convert it into an animated video, create your own YouTube channel, and
Yeah.
you can promote your book via those means as well.
Yeah.
So you're right in saying, look, there is a lot of opportunity. I don't disagree with that fact there. I just feel there's a lot of writers out there at the moment, and in the local community. Look, my podcast has been about, the music side of entertainment. Now I've gone on to the author side, and I'm glad that I got a good relationship with local media. And, we want to get authors because I've come across authors out there, they just don't have the direction. Just like
Right.
when I started consulting with music, musicians don't know how to become independent, which direction to go, which legalities do I need to have in play. So now we're
Right.
doing that with authors, as well. So it's just a matter of, like there was a punchline to what I was going to say, to that. Yeah, I just got mixed up with the whole consulting and mentioning music as well. But I mean, the people are out there, but you just have to, think outside the box. That
And
wasn't what I was
also,
going to say, but it's what I'm going to sum it up.
yeah, think outside the box. But the other thing, to go back to what you mentioned early on, is if this is something you truly love, if creating this art, whatever that art is, art,
Yeah,
music, or whatever, stories, don't give up on yourself, because it's getting up that one more time that can make all the difference in the world, between
yeah,
failing and succeeding.
yeah. No, 100%. But Mark, I mean, this has been truly inspirational. You're quite enthusiastic, and that's rare to find these days at 55 years old. I would have never have guessed. I would have never guessed at 55 years old. I'm going to be honest
Well,
with you.
I'm really a
Yeah.
17-year-old boy at heart. I just have an old person's body. So
Yeah. And I mean, thanks for the work that you're doing, and for inspiring up and coming writers. That's what we're attempting to do. Yeah.
yeah,
Many are just stuck at the moment.
yeah,
Stuck. They have a piece of material written, they don't know which direction to go with. They,
right,
and it's also, I'm honored, that I get the opportunity on the podcast to bring in international guests who have much more experience and have been in the game for as long as you've been and found so much success as you have found. Because like in South Africa, for example, in third world countries, people have just not gone across the border as yet to educate themselves on which
Right.
direction can I actually go down. What
Yeah.
can I do?
Yeah.
And when you really think about it, tuning into a simple podcast like this, 1 hour, 11 minutes, everything that you have mentioned in this podcast alone, yes, you promoted your own work as well, which I want people to get familiar with. But I mean, just sharing knowledge, basic knowledge, and sharing, the pros and cons of going the traditional route, with a
Yeah.
huge publishing house versus being independent. Just getting familiar with all the information really can assist. It's not rocket science anymore to get your book on Kindle.
Yeah.
I mean,
Or
any part.
Kobo, and I should
Or
mention
Kobo,
this. So
yeah.
I worked for Kobo for 6 years, and the fifth. So Kobo is the most popular in Canada, but in the top 5 countries, because Kobo is available around the world, South Africa was usually in the top 4 or 5 countries that
Okay.
Kobo books sold. Both the English and French markets. As you know, there's probably a French population in South Africa as well, at least according to the people who were buying books when I was tracking those. So it was always
That's
interesting to see. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
there are people reading on Kobo in South Africa right now. So,
Yeah, like I mean, I wasn't familiar with Kobo until you actually mentioned it. And this is like, where, my task, in South Africa. Of course, it's a global mandate, especially, with all these other podcasts and people I'm associated with,
yeah.
is the lower class at the moment. If we look at, okay, the data is saying, okay, there's a lot of people that are using Kobo now. And the first thing that comes to mind, okay, it's people that are coming now from the middle class upwards.
Probably, yeah.
How I
Well,
started
or are
off.
they getting stuff through the library too? Like, I don't know what the library systems are like there, but that's also an opportunity for writers and readers.
Well, our local one needs a huge upgrade. I give
Okay.
it.
All right. All right.
Needs a huge upgrade.
Yeah.
So yeah, my main mandate from day one is, I'm targeting, the lower class, because I've come across a lot of talent. And I'm not just talking about musicians, I'm talking about creators in general
Yeah.
that just don't have the means or the opportunities, or they still feel they don't have the opportunities, but then there's
Right.
people like
Yeah.
us now, that are coming
Yeah.
up, or they don't know which direction to go. So, like, I'm aiming there because I feel there's just so much potential there, and there's just not enough light that's actually
Yeah.
shown, shine on them.
Right.
So
Yeah.
now we want to bring them to light.
Yes.
We want to
Awesome.
bring them to light,
Yeah.
on my end. So yeah, so I mean, thanks a lot, man, and I appreciate all the work that you are doing. So where can people find you online besides your official website, which I will share?
Yeah, so markleslie.ca, there's links to me on social media. So it'll be under Mark Leslie, or then the really hard to spell Mark Leslie Lefebvre. But I'm out there. If you search Mark Leslie, you're going to find me all over the place. Instagram, you'll find me on YouTube, you'll find me on Twitter, you'll find me on all the various, most of the various platforms. I've got some sort of presence where I'm either sharing my love of books and writing, stupid dad jokes, or stuff about
Now, man, you're a cool guy, man. You're a cool
yeah.
guy.
It was great to chat with you. Thanks
Yeah.
for having me on.
Yeah. Is that, I mean, there's when it comes to each guest, like, I know how to, like, get the podcast actually going. It's sort of like just this feeling. That's how, like, with you, I could like come onto the podcast like with this cool vibe. Mark Leslie in the house. Not all guests I can do that with.
Yeah.
Like, just on, like, like, I don't have a lot of time to like go into like extensive research about a person that'll be coming onto the podcast.
Right.
And sometimes, like, I do get like 24-hour notice,
Yeah.
But I just like sort of get that feeling, this is gonna be this type of guest, this is gonna be this type of guest, like, but you're a cool guy, man. And I got much love and respect for the work, that you're doing. So yeah, keep at it. I'm looking forward to reading your stories. I'm finding time, even though I'm when we started out the podcast, I was talking about the challenges in finding time just to get through the current material that I have lying around the place. But yeah, I do want to get to it. And
awesome. Well, I'll send you a link where you can get some of the stories in audio if that's easier for listening.
yeah. Let me give it a shot. Like, I listen to a lot of podcasts. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, that's true. Yeah. So do I.
Podcasts. Like when I'm, out for a morning jog or so on, I love to listen to a lot of podcasts. I haven't fully, I'll be completely honest with you, listened to a full audiobook.
Yeah.
That I have not done.
That's a tough one, but I'll send you a short story. You can give it a try.
Yeah, give it a try. Let's see, what works, for me or not, whether that's my cup of tea.
It may not be,
Yeah. As I said, like I love the physical copy. Like, I can spend more time on the physical copy. For Kindle, for example, like, I try to limit my screen time as well,
Gotcha.
because that, we have to also be cautious of that. So, I would probably read more chapters with a physical copy than I would with a Kindle, just
Makes
so,
sense.
to limit, my screen time. But no, thanks, man. Thanks for sharing that. I mean, send that through. I'll give it a shot. And anything else that you would love me to share within the description and so on, you're more than welcome to send it to me. It's not, we'll be uploading,
all right,
tomorrow within the next few days. So anything between now, the next 24 hours, you would want me to share, you're more than welcome to send it to me.
All right.
Thanks, man. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Yeah, man, this was fun. This was fun and exciting, and I love having enjoyable conversation where you can also laugh as well.
Yeah. Thank you.
Not just all the work, But yeah, thanks, man. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, you too. Take care.
Cool, man.
Bye.
Bye.